Looking back, I wonder if our marriage was ever truly as solid as I believed it to be. Emily and I had been together for a decade, married for 8 years, and built what I thought was a stable life. We had no children, by choice, preferring to enjoy our freedom, our careers, and the little luxuries we afforded ourselves. I worked in finance, long hours but good pay, while Emily ran a small boutique that allowed her a sense of independence. She thrived on that freedom, always needing something to keep her engaged. Whether it was new business ideas, social outings, or random hobbies she'd throw herself into with full intensity before growing bored and moving on to the next. I admired her energy, but I never imagined that same restlessness would one day become a wedge between us. In the beginning, she was passionate, affectionate, unpredictable in the best ways. Our love was consuming, the kind that made me feel like I was the luckiest man alive. Over the years, that passion settled into something more familiar, a quiet companionship that I found comfort in. We still laughed together, we still shared inside jokes, we still made love, though not as frequently as we once had. It was normal, I thought, for things to change, for the fire to become embers rather than an uncontrollable blaze. I assumed she felt the same, that she understood that love wasn't just about passion, but about commitment, about choosing each other every single day. I was wrong. The first real fracture came one evening over dinner. It was a quiet night at one of our favorite restaurants, a place that had become a ritual for us. Emily had been unusually pensive, swirling her wine, staring at me in that way that made me feel like she was carefully considering her words before saying them. When she finally spoke, it wasn't what I expected. She asked me what I thought about an open marriage, as if she were casually suggesting we redecorate the living room. I had laughed at first, waiting for her to join in, to tell me she was joking. But she wasn't. Her eyes were serious, almost hopeful, as she told me she had been reading about it, about how some couples found it strengthened their marriages, that love and sex weren't necessarily the same thing. She framed it as an opportunity, a way to grow together rather than apart. I didn't need time to consider it. I told her no, firmly, without hesitation. I didn't want to share my wife with another man, nor did I want the permission to be with other women. The thought of it repulsed me, not because of some outdated sense of morality, but because I knew deep down that allowing others into our marriage would destroy the foundation of trust we had built. I had always believed we were enough for each other, that we had promised exclusivity not out of obligation but out of love. When I told her that, she looked at me like I was the one being unreasonable, like I was small-minded, clinging to an outdated idea of relationships. I had expected the conversation to be a one-time thing, an impulsive thought she would quickly dismiss, but it lingered. She didn't bring it up again in the same direct way, but the shift between us was impossible to ignore. The closeness we once had began to erode. She became distant, withdrawn, more absorbed in her phone, more eager to spend time outside the house. When I reached for her at night, she pulled away more often than not, claiming exhaustion or stress. I wanted to believe this was just a phase, that she was adjusting to something within herself, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had already lost something, that whatever thread had once held us together had begun to fray the moment she had voiced that desire. I told myself that marriages went through rough patches, that people changed and that maybe, with time, we would find our way back to each other. I ignored the nagging feeling in my gut, the unease that settled into my bones every time I watched her type something on her phone with a half-smile she didn't bother explaining. I wanted to trust her, to believe that we were still the couple we had always been. But some part of me already knew the truth, even if I wasn't ready to face it. The tension between us became something unspoken yet ever-present, an invisible barrier that neither of us acknowledged outright. Emily had stopped bringing up the idea of an open marriage, but the damage had already been done. The way she looked at me changed, like she was seeing someone who had disappointed her. I wasn't the man who excited her anymore. I was the man who had shut down her grand idea, the man who was content with a life she no longer found fulfilling. At least, that's how it felt. I told myself I was overthinking it, that she was just adjusting to the realization that her suggestion had failed, but her behavior made it impossible to ignore. She was distant, distracted, restless in a way that didn't feel like a passing mood. Her routine began shifting, subtly at first. but noticeable to someone who had spent nearly a decade by her side. She worked later, claiming inventory or supplier issues at the boutique, though I never remembered her needing so many late nights before. She started spending more time out with her friends, women whose names I had heard in passing, but whom she had never mentioned as being particularly close with until now. She started dressing differently, not drastically, but enough that I noticed the extra effort. Her gym sessions became more frequent, her phone was always in her hand, and when she wasn't scrolling through it, it was face down on the counter. None of these things, on their own, were evidence of anything, but together, they painted a picture I wasn't ready to look at. I asked her once, offhandedly, if everything was okay between us. She smiled, almost too quickly, and told me, of course, that she had just been thinking about her life, about what she wanted, about making sure she didn't wake up one day with regrets. It wasn't a direct accusation, but it felt like one, like she was telling me, without saying the words, that she had already started questioning whether this life, this marriage, was enough for her. I wanted to fix it. I tried. I suggested a weekend getaway, just the two of us, but she said she was too busy with work. I tried to be more present, to show her that I still desired her, but she brushed me off with absent-minded excuses, claiming exhaustion or stress. She still kissed me goodbye in the mornings, still sat next to me on the couch, still responded when I told her I loved her, but there was no warmth behind any of it. It felt like going through the motions, a performance designed to maintain appearances rather than genuine affection. I told myself I was imagining things, that if she had truly wanted to leave, she would have said so, that if something was happening, I would have seen undeniable proof. I became hyper-aware of everything, looking for clues I didn't even want to find. I checked her phone once when she left it unattended, but there was nothing suspicious, no hidden conversations, no unfamiliar names. If something was going on, she was either careful or it hadn't escalated to that point yet. Then came the night that cemented my fears. She had told me she was going to dinner with friends, a casual statement as she slipped on a dress I hadn't seen in years, one that hugged her body in a way that made me uneasy rather than appreciative. She gave me a quick kiss, grabbed her purse, and was gone before I could ask anything more. Hours passed, and when midnight came and went, I texted to check in. She didn't respond. When she finally came home, it was nearly 2 in the morning. She was careful, too careful, slipping off her heels at the door to avoid waking me, but I had been awake the whole time. I listened to her move through the house, the soft rustling of fabric, the faint scent of perfume and something else, something I couldn't quite place, but something that didn't belong to me. I didn't ask her anything the next morning. I just watched her. The way she moved, the way she avoided my gaze, just enough to confirm what I already knew. Something was changing. Something was slipping. And I wasn't sure if I was ready to know just how far it had already gone. The days that followed felt like a slow, agonizing unraveling. Every interaction between us was laced with something unspoken, a tension that neither of us addressed, but both of us felt. I stopped asking where she was going when she left the house late, stopped sending texts to check in, stopped pretending that things were normal. I told myself that if she had nothing to hide, she would notice my withdrawal, that she would try to bridge the growing gap between us. But she didn't. Instead, she seemed almost relieved, as if my silence granted her the freedom to exist without the burden of my expectations. She came home later and later, and when she was home, she was elsewhere. Always on her phone, always distracted, always with some excuse about why she was too tired, too busy, too overwhelmed to connect with me the way we used to. The shift was undeniable now. It was no longer something I could dismiss as paranoia. I could feel it in the way she avoided my touch, in the way she would turn her body just slightly when I reached for her at night, in the way she would respond to my "I love you" with a hesitant smile instead of words. She was pulling away, little by little, and I was being forced to watch her slip through my fingers with no way to stop it. I told myself that if I confronted her, she would have no choice but to tell me the truth. But what truth did I want? If I was wrong, if this was all in my head, then I would be the jealous, controlling husband who didn't trust his wife. And if I was right, if my worst fears were real, then I would be forced to face the inevitable, to acknowledge that the woman I loved was no longer mine in the way I had believed. Neither outcome was one I wanted. So I did nothing. I let the days pass, let the distance grow, let her live in whatever secret world she had created for herself. The excuses became predictable. Late nights at the boutique, drinks with friends, an impromptu work meeting. The names she mentioned were vague, the plans always made at the last minute. It wasn't just that she was spending more time away. It was the way she spoke about it, the rehearsed casualness in her voice, the way she over-explained details that I hadn't even asked for. She was careful, but not careful enough. One evening, as she stood in the bathroom getting ready for another night out, I watched her from the bedroom, studying the way she applied her makeup with an attention to detail I hadn't seen in years. She looked beautiful, undeniably so, but it wasn't for me. That realization hit harder than I expected. She still cared enough to make an effort, still wanted to be desired, but that desire was no longer directed toward me. She caught my reflection in the mirror and smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I won't be too late," she said, as if that meant anything anymore. She left without a kiss. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of our marriage, searching for the exact point where everything had shifted. Had it been the night she first brought up the idea of an open marriage? Had it been earlier than that? Had I missed the warning signs years ago? I wanted to believe this was something new, something that had crept into our lives without warning, but deep down, I feared the truth was much worse. Maybe Emily had been slipping away for a long time, and I had been too blind, too trusting, too willing to believe in the permanence of love to see it. At some point, exhaustion overtook me, but my sleep was restless, filled with fragmented dreams of Emily walking away from me, her face blurred, her voice distant. When I woke up, it was past 2 in the morning. She still wasn't home. I didn't call. I didn't text. I just lay there in the dark, waiting, knowing that when she finally walked through the door, she would smell like something unfamiliar, like a world I no longer belonged to. I don't know when exactly it started, only that by the time I allowed myself to accept the possibility, it was already too late. Suspicion had turned into certainty, a dull ache settling deep in my chest as I watched my wife slip further and further away. She was careful, cautious, but not perfect. It was in the small details, how she always left her phone face down, how she suddenly needed privacy when she never had before, how her late nights stretched longer, how she smelled of cologne that wasn't mine. I told myself I wouldn't look through her phone again, that I wouldn't reduce myself to snooping, but my self-restraint broke the night she came home past 3 in the morning, her makeup smudged, her breath heavy with wine, her clothes just slightly disheveled. She moved through the house as if she were sleepwalking, slipping off her heels and heading straight to the bathroom without so much as a glance in my direction. I stayed still, pretending to be asleep, waiting for her to settle into bed beside me. She never did. Instead, I heard her phone vibrate on the nightstand, once, twice, then a third time. I waited until I heard the shower running before I reached for it, my heart hammering against my ribs. The lock screen revealed nothing, just her usual notifications, work emails, social media. But then I saw it. A name I didn't recognize, a text preview just enough to make my stomach turn. "Tonight was incredible. I can't stop thinking about you." My hands clenched around the phone as the sound of water filled the silence around me. I knew if I opened it, if I unlocked the full extent of what she had been hiding, I would be crossing a line that could never be uncrossed. But hadn't she already done the same? Hadn't she already destroyed what we had with her secrets and lies? My fingers moved before my mind could catch up, entering the passcode I had memorized without ever admitting to myself that I had been paying attention. The messages were all there, laid out in front of me like a slow-motion car crash I couldn't look away from. Weeks of conversations, plans made under the guise of business meetings and late-night drinks, details of stolen moments, of hidden rendezvous, of laughter and whispered promises that had no place between a wife and someone who wasn't her husband. The words blurred together, but the meaning was painfully clear. Emily had already left me. She just hadn't bothered to tell me yet. The shower turned off, and I barely had time to place the phone back where I had found it before she emerged from the bathroom, wrapped in a towel, her wet hair dripping onto the carpet. She looked at me then, her expression unreadable, as if trying to gauge whether I was awake, whether I had seen anything, whether the fragile illusion she had built was still intact. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just watched her slip into bed beside me, felt the mattress shift under her weight, smelled the faint trace of unfamiliar cologne clinging to her skin. She was right there, inches away, but she had never felt farther. I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying every lie she had told, every moment she had chosen him over me. I could have confronted her right then, could have shaken her awake and demanded answers, but what would have been the point? The truth wasn't something she was willing to give me. She had made her choice long before I discovered it. I just hadn't been ready to see it. By morning, I knew what had to come next. I wouldn't yell. I wouldn't beg. I wouldn't break down and ask her why. I would let her dig her own grave, let her believe she was still in control, let her think that I was the fool she had made me out to be. But she wasn't the only one who could play this game. If she thought she could betray me and walk away unscathed, she was sorely mistaken. She had no idea who she had just turned into her enemy. I woke up that morning feeling hollow, the kind of emptiness that comes after something irreparable has been broken. Emily stirred beside me, her breathing soft and steady, completely unaware that I had spent the entire night reliving every lie, every betrayal, every moment she had chosen him over me. I lay there for a few minutes, listening to the rhythm of her breath, forcing myself to remain still, to act as though nothing had changed. Because as much as I wanted to grab her, shake her awake, and demand to know how long she had been making a fool of me, I knew it would be pointless. She would deny it. She would twist the truth. She would tell me that I was imagining things, that it wasn't what it looked like, that I had it all wrong. And then, when she realized there was no way to manipulate her way out of it, she would turn it around on me, accuse me of invading her privacy, of not trusting her, of being the reason she had drifted away in the first place. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of playing the victim. Instead, I got up and went about my morning as if nothing was wrong. I made coffee, checked my emails, showered, dressed for work. I even kissed her on the forehead before I left, watching her stretch lazily in bed like she hadn't just spent the night wrapped in the memory of another man's touch. She smiled at me, thanked me for the coffee, told me she had a long day ahead. I nodded, told her I loved her, and walked out the door before I could let my disgust show. At work, I was barely functional. My mind wasn't on numbers, on reports, on emails. It was on her, on them, on every message I had read, every detail she had shared with him that she no longer shared with me. I had given her everything, my loyalty, my trust, my commitment, and in return, she had betrayed me so completely that I felt like a stranger in my own marriage. But as the hours passed, something inside me shifted. The sadness, the heartbreak, the gut-wrenching pain of knowing I had been replaced. It all began to harden into something else, something colder. I wasn't going to be the pathetic husband who let his wife walk all over him. I wasn't going to be the man who cried himself to sleep while she snuck around, thinking she had gotten away with it. No, I was going to be patient. I was going to be smart. I was going to let her dig her own grave while I stood back and watched. Because if she thought she was going to get away with this, she was dead wrong. That night, when I came home, she greeted me with a smile, as if nothing had changed. She asked about my day, laughed at some meaningless story I told, leaned in close enough for me to smell the remnants of a perfume she hadn't worn in years, one she used to save for special occasions, for nights when she wanted to be desired. I smiled back, played the role of the oblivious husband, and watched as she relaxed, as she believed she had me exactly where she wanted. She didn't know that I was already making plans, that I had spent my lunch break looking up lawyers, that I had started keeping track of her lies, documenting everything, preparing for the moment when I would pull the rug out from under her. She didn't know that every touch, every kiss, every smile she gave me now only fueled the fire inside me. She thought she had one. She thought she had me fooled. She had no idea what was coming. Every day that passed felt like a test of my patience. I had seen the messages. I knew the truth. But Emily carried on as if nothing had changed, playing the role of the devoted wife while sneaking away to be with him. She thought she was careful, but she wasn't careful enough. Her excuses became routine, her absences predictable, her behavior so rehearsed that it almost insulted me. She had convinced herself that I was blind, that I was just another clueless husband who would never suspect a thing. I let her believe it. I continued being the same husband I had always been. I asked about her day. I kissed her goodbye in the mornings. I listened when she talked about her boutique. I didn't let my anger show, didn't give her any reason to suspect that I knew everything. But behind my calm exterior, I was gathering evidence, preparing for the moment when I would make my move. I wasn't just going to confront her. I was going to destroy her. I started by tracking her movements. She was predictable now, slipping into a routine that revolved around him. On the nights she claimed to be working late, I followed her. It didn't take long to confirm what I already knew. She wasn't at the boutique. She wasn't with her so-called friends. She was with him. I watched from a distance as she met him outside a hotel, as they laughed, as she touched his arm in that familiar way she used to touch mine. I felt the rage coil inside me, but I forced myself to stay still, to wait. This wasn't the moment. Not yet. The next step was securing proof. I took pictures, recorded timestamps, kept a detailed log of every lie she told. I reached out to a lawyer, explained my situation, learned exactly what I needed to make sure she got nothing in the divorce. I wasn't just going to leave her. I was going to make sure she walked away with nothing. At home, she was affectionate again, almost as if she was trying to overcompensate, as if a part of her felt guilty for what she was doing. She kissed me longer, held my hand more, told me she loved me in a way that almost sounded genuine. But it wasn't love. It was manipulation. She thought she could have it all, her marriage, her affair, her perfect little double life. She had no idea that I was about to rip it all away from her. One night, as she lay next to me, her phone lit up on the nightstand. I didn't even need to look at the message to know who it was from. She turned slightly, just enough to check the screen without making it obvious. She thought I was asleep. She didn't realize that I had been watching her every move for weeks. I almost laughed. She thought she was in control. She thought she was winning. She had no idea she was already trapped. By the time I had everything in place, the anger inside me had settled into something sharper, more deliberate. I no longer felt the raw pain of betrayal. I had pushed past that, forced myself into a state of calculated control. Emily had no idea that every move she made was being watched, that every lie she told had already been documented. She still carried herself with the confidence of someone who believed she was untouchable, someone who thought she had me wrapped around her finger. She kissed me goodbye in the mornings, left the house with a smile, and returned home with the scent of another man still clinging to her skin. I had stopped wondering how long it had been going on. It didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that I had enough evidence to end this marriage on my terms. But before I pulled the trigger, before I exposed her for the lying, cheating woman she had become, I had one last thing to do. If she wanted an open marriage so badly, if she wanted the thrill of something new, then I would give her exactly what she had been craving. I would take my own revenge, not with words, not with anger, but by doing to her what she had done to me. It wasn't difficult. I wasn't a bad-looking man, and unlike Emily, I had never strayed. But now, with my marriage already dead, with the knowledge that she had thrown away everything we had built, I no longer felt bound by loyalty. I met someone, nothing serious, nothing meaningful, just a woman who was willing to help me rewrite the final chapter of my marriage on my own terms. I didn't love her. I didn't need to. This wasn't about love. This was about evening the score. The first time it happened, I expected to feel guilt. I expected some part of me to hesitate, to remind me that I was still married, that I had once vowed to be faithful to Emily no matter what. But there was nothing. No hesitation, no guilt, no second thoughts. She had taken everything from me. My trust, my security, my belief in us. I had nothing left to give her. So, when I kissed another woman, when I let her touch me in ways Emily hadn't in months, I felt nothing but satisfaction. That night, when I came home, Emily was already asleep. I lay beside her, listening to her slow, steady breathing, wondering if she would ever feel the way I had felt, if she would ever experience that gut-wrenching moment of realization, that slow unraveling of everything she thought was secure. I wanted her to know. I wanted her to feel it. But not yet. The moment wasn't right. I waited a little longer, played the role of the loving husband just a bit more, let her believe that she was still in control. But the end was coming, and when it arrived, she wouldn't see it coming. She thought she was untouchable, that she had successfully built her perfect double life. She was about to learn just how wrong she was. I didn't have to wait long for the perfect moment. Emily had grown bolder, more reckless, comfortable in her belief that I was still blind to her betrayal. She no longer made excuses for coming home late, no longer pretended to be exhausted when she slipped into bed beside me. If anything, she seemed lighter, freer, as if the weight of secrecy had disappeared now that she had convinced herself I would never suspect a thing. The woman who once worried about hurting my feelings now barely flinched when she canceled dinner plans at the last minute, or turned her phone away when a message flashed across the screen. She was too confident, too sure of herself. That overconfidence would be her downfall. I had planned to be late that evening, deliberately stretching out my workday so she would believe she had the house to herself. I knew what she would do. The pattern was always the same. She would take her time getting ready, light candles in the bedroom like she hadn't done for me in years, and then she would welcome him into our home, into my bed, with the kind of enthusiasm she had long since stopped showing me. But today was different. Today, I wasn't going to stay late at work. Today, I was going to come home early. As I pulled into the driveway, my hands were steady. There was no hesitation, no second thoughts. I had already mourned this marriage. I had already felt the heartbreak, the anger, the disbelief. Now, all that was left was the moment itself. I stepped out of the car, closed the door quietly, and walked to the front entrance. The house was dark except for the faint glow of candlelight seeping through the curtains of our bedroom. I already knew what I would find. I opened the door slowly, stepping inside without making a sound. The air smelled different. Faint traces of cologne that didn't belong to me, the unmistakable scent of sweat and skin and sin. From down the hall, muffled sounds filtered through the walls, the soft creak of the bed, the occasional murmur of voices. My breath was even, my heartbeat steady. I had imagined this moment so many times, but now that it was here, I felt nothing but cold certainty. I pulled out my phone, opened the camera, and pressed record. With one sharp movement, I pushed the bedroom door open. For a split second, time froze. Emily's eyes met mine, wide with horror, her body tangled in the sheets, her hands scrambling to cover herself. The man beside her, him, the faceless shadow I had imagined for weeks, stared at me, his face shifting from shock to something more primal, more defensive. But I didn't care about him. He was nothing. My focus was on her, on the wife who had once promised to love me, to be faithful, to stand by my side. She gasped my name, but I didn't react. I just stood there, recording everything, letting her see the truth in my eyes, letting her understand, in one crushing instant, that she had finally lost. Her mouth moved, forming words I couldn't hear over the rushing blood in my ears. Excuses, maybe, please, but it didn't matter. The time for explanations had long since passed. I ended the recording, slipped my phone back into my pocket, and turned away without a word. She had no idea what was coming next. I walked out of the bedroom without looking back, ignoring Emily's frantic scrambling, her breathless pleas, the sheets rustling as she fumbled for something. Her dignity, her clothes, an excuse. None of it mattered. The image of her tangled with another man was burned into my mind, but it no longer held power over me. I had already known. Seeing it with my own eyes only solidified what I had spent weeks preparing for. Behind me, I heard the idiot in my bed mumbling curses under his breath, scrambling to put his clothes on, no doubt debating whether to say something to me or just slip out like the coward he was. I gave him no attention. He wasn't worth it. He wasn't my problem. My problem was Emily, the woman who had vowed to be faithful to me, the woman who had shattered our marriage with her selfishness. And she was about to find out exactly what that betrayal would cost her. As I reached the front door, she finally caught up to me, still wrapped in the bedsheet, her hair a tangled mess, her face wild with panic. "Wait, please, let me explain," she begged, her voice shaking. I turned slowly, meeting her eyes with an expression so calm, so devoid of emotion that she actually flinched. Explain? My voice was even, eerily controlled. You want to explain? I let the words hang between us, watching as realization set in. She knew. She knew there was nothing she could say that would erase what had just happened. Her hands clutched the sheet tighter around her chest, her breathing uneven. It's not what it looks like, she stammered, the classic defense, the desperate grasp at a lifeline that no longer existed. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so predictable, so pathetic. Not what it looks like? I repeated, tilting my head slightly. So you weren't just in my bed with another man while your husband was at work. Enlighten me, Emily. What exactly am I misunderstanding? Tears welled in her eyes, but they meant nothing to me. She wasn't crying because she regretted what she had done. She was crying because she had been caught. I never wanted to hurt you, she whispered, as if that somehow excused it all. I exhaled sharply, shaking my head. You didn't just hurt me, I said, my voice quiet but firm. You destroyed us. And for what? For this. I gestured toward the bedroom where her lover was still scrambling to find his shoes, doing his best to pretend he wasn't a part of this mess. She reached for me, desperation etched into every movement, but I stepped back, letting the distance between us stretch further. No, I said coldly. You don't get to touch me. Not anymore. Her lip trembled. Please, let's talk about this. We can fix it. I cut her off with a bitter laugh. Fix it? I repeated. There's nothing left to fix, Emily. You made sure of that. For a moment, she just stared at me, realization sinking in, her breathing uneven. Please, she whispered, her voice breaking. I love you. That was the final insult, the final betrayal. I looked her dead in the eyes, my voice devoid of anything but quiet certainty. No, Emily, you don't. And with that, I walked out the door, slamming it shut behind me. She had no idea what was coming next. Walking out that door felt like shedding dead weight, like finally breathing fresh air after being suffocated for too long. Emily had begged, pleaded, tried to throw together whatever feeble excuse she could manage, but none of it mattered. I had been planning this for weeks. Her tears, her pathetic attempts at damage control, they were just noise. What was coming next would be the real punishment. I didn't go far. I sat in my car just down the street, my hands steady as I scrolled through my phone. The video I had taken, the proof of her betrayal, was right there in my gallery. I played it once, watching the raw panic in her eyes as she realized she had been caught. There was no mistaking what was happening in that room. No way she could twist this into something innocent. She had made her choices, and now, she would deal with the consequences. The first message I sent was to my lawyer. I had already spoken to him weeks ago, had already been advised on what I needed to secure the upper hand in the divorce. Now, with concrete evidence in my hands, it was time to move forward. I attached the video, along with a simple message, I'm ready. File everything. His response was immediate. Understood. We'll serve her this week. Next came her family. I had no interest in destroying Emily's life just for the sake of it, but I wasn't going to let her control the narrative. Her sister had always liked me, and I knew she would want to hear the truth from me before Emily could spin her lies. I just thought you should know why your sister's marriage is ending. Video attached. Take care. I didn't wait for a response. I didn't need one. Then, her workplace. Emily loved her boutique, loved the reputation she had built in her small circle of business owners. Unfortunately for her, I also knew that she had been using work as her primary excuse to sneak around. She had lied about business trips, lied about late nights handling inventory. Her store had become the perfect alibi, and I had no doubt that at least some of her employees knew what was going on. I sent an anonymous email to her business partner, attaching the screenshots of her messages with her affair partner. Thought you should know what's been happening on company time. And finally, the man she had thrown our marriage away for. I had no intention of fighting him, no intention of getting into some pathetic showdown over a woman who wasn't worth it. But I wasn't going to let him walk away without consequences either. I had done my research. I knew he was married. I had found his wife's social media, her LinkedIn, even a picture of their kids. He had done to her exactly what Emily had done to me. Lied, betrayed, ripped apart a home that should have been sacred. She deserved to know the truth, just as I had. I hesitated for only a moment before sending the final message. Your husband has been sleeping with my wife. Here's the proof. Video attached. Screenshots attached. No explanation needed. When it was done, I sat back in my seat, exhaling slowly. There was no satisfaction, no victory, just finality. Emily had spent months making a fool of me, treating me like an obstacle to be worked around, a man she could deceive without consequence. She had underestimated me. She had believed she could have it all, her husband, her affair, her perfect little life. She was about to lose everything, and I wasn't going to be there to save her. The messages had been sent. The divorce was in motion. There was nothing left to do but watch everything unfold. I had spent weeks preparing for this moment, meticulously gathering evidence, ensuring there was no escape for Emily. Now, she would finally experience what it felt like to have the rug pulled out from under her. It didn't take long for the consequences to start rolling in. The first call came from Emily, frantic and breathless. I ignored it. Then came the texts, one after another, flooding my phone with desperate apologies, with pathetic attempts at reasoning, with pleas for a second chance. We can fix this. Please, just talk to me. I made a mistake. It didn't mean anything. You're my husband. I love you. You don't have to do this. Let's talk before you make any rash decisions. Rash decisions? That was rich, coming from her. As if I hadn't spent weeks watching her throw away our marriage like it was nothing. As if I hadn't lain awake at night, knowing she was with another man while I sat at home like a fool. No, this wasn't a rash decision. This was justice. Then came the call from her sister. Unlike Emily, she didn't beg. She didn't try to make excuses for her. She simply said, "I'm so sorry. I had no idea." And I believed her. There was no anger in her voice, just disappointment. Disappointment in the woman she thought she knew. The next wave came from her workplace. Apparently, her business partner hadn't taken kindly to finding out that Emily had been using their store as an excuse for her affairs. It wasn't long before she was forced out of the boutique she had worked so hard to build. Reputation was everything in her world, and now, hers was crumbling. Then, the best part, the moment I had been waiting for. The affair partner's wife had received my message, and she hadn't been quiet about it. I wasn't there to see it, but I heard from a mutual acquaintance that she had confronted her husband in public, screaming at him in front of a room full of people. He had tried to deny it at first, but when she shoved the proof in his face, the screenshots, the video, there was nothing he could say. She left him that night, moved out, took the kids, filed for divorce immediately. Emily didn't come home that night. Not that I expected her to. She had nowhere to go, no one to turn to. Her affair partner was too busy dealing with the wreckage of his own life, and her friends, at least the ones who still had any morals, wanted nothing to do with her. The perfect little world she had built, the fantasy life she thought she could maintain, had collapsed around her. When she finally did return, she didn't try to act like the confident, untouchable woman she once was. She was small now, hollow, barely able to look me in the eye. Her voice was weak when she asked, "Can we talk?" I didn't answer. I simply handed her the divorce papers. She hesitated, as if there was anything left to save, then finally took them with shaking hands. Her lips parted, but she said nothing. What could she say? There were no words that could undo what she had done. "I want you out by the end of the week," I said, my voice steady, controlled. Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't care. She had cried for him, had begged for him, had betrayed me for him. Those tears weren't for me. They were for herself, for the life she had just lost. She tried to speak again, but I turned away, walking past her without another word. There was nothing left to say. By the end of the week, she was gone. The house was mine again. My life was mine again. And as I stood in the quiet, in the space she had once filled with her lies and deceit, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace.